Thank you so much for everyone for coming through today. Excited to hear from two experts who really have a lot of kind of deep expertise on enterprise system deployment and deploying kind of large scale software across enterprises of a really big variety. We've got healthcare, banking, and fashion represented in two people. To start, I want to tee up a little bit of context about what we're going to go through. So I want to give a few intros, and then we're going to dive into a number of different question areas. I think we want to spend some time talking about whether an enterprise even needs an ERP today and where we're going in terms of ERP adoption over the next kind of 5 to 10 years. We'll then look at a little bit about how we identify a project when it's going south and how we can turn that around. I know across both Will and Erin, there's a large amount of expertise there. And then also finally going to touch on what everybody wants to talk about, which is AI-enabled ERPs. And with a lot of new market entrants coming in, where we think the AI-enabled ERP market is destined to go over the next few years. But to start, I want to open for a few intros. So Erin, want to give the floor to you first, if you can give a couple of minutes on your background.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, George and Will, for having me here today. So my name is Erin Barton. I am the VP of Technology and Delivery here at TripleBolt. TripleBolt is in a really fun and unique space where we do implementations for large SaaS products like ERPs, like CPM systems. We also do custom development to help bridge the gap that some of those implementations leave behind for the configured system versus something that is truly customizable. And then we do consulting about the best way to enhance your entire ecosystem to bring the value of the purchase platforms, anything that you may have built in-house, anything that needs to be built, to make sure that your company is actually set up for what I like to call who you want to be when you grow up, instead of maybe who you are today. So that's who I am now. Then back to who I was in the past. I've done ERP and CPM implementations at a variety of different companies. I worked with SAP, I've worked with Infor, I've worked with CCH Tagetik primarily. And I think my biggest sort of takeaway from all of those pieces and coming through different industries, George mentioned fashion, I have worked in that, I've worked in manufacturing as well, is just how ERP systems are critical, misunderstood, and sometimes used as a catch-all for everything that is wrong in a company. And I'm really interested to dig more into that as well and get Will's perspective.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin. Will, do you want to give a few seconds on your background?
Yeah, of course, mate. Just one thing before I do. Did you refer to me as an expert in projects that are going south?
I referred to you as an expert in turning projects going south or around.
Okay, nice.
Just
okay,
to clarify his statement.
Nice save. Cool, thanks, mate. So yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me all. I'm Will Jackson. I'm the COO at Vasori. So obviously have a vested interest in ERPs because obviously a key benefit is the operational efficiency that they can offer. So I won't pretend to have as much kind of experience or context in ERP specifically as Erin does. So definitely the floor's predominantly hers for this webinar. But yeah, a little bit on my kind of background prior to Vasori. So I've been here for around 18 months now. Prior to that, I was predominantly in financial services. So I worked for Accenture over quite a few FS clients, did a few kind of replatforming for big kind of card platform migrations. I've been always heavily involved in interoperability and API space. So at Barclays Bank, my first kind of big role there was to be the director of open banking. Obviously, that was hugely API centric. I think Barclays had around 3 APIs production live prior to open banking. And we delivered a suite of over 200 to support that kind of delivery. So naturally then fell into a position as head of API for Barclays Bank UK after that. Then I got a little bit bored of FS and making banks loads of money. So I decided to pivot a little bit and went into healthcare, where I became head of API and platform engineering for the National Health Service, which was amazing, really fun role, really interesting. I would caveat that with saying initially, because the project I was brought in to do was great. They've got a system called Spine, and they basically, which holds all central kind of patient data and information, and they wanted to work out how they could federate that out to all the different kind of practitioners. That was great. Then it got a little bit stagnant after that. Vasori came in to do a NHS hackathon, which is where I met our CEO, Sean, and the rest is history from there on out.
Nice. Yeah, we can definitely touch on the Spine project a little more in a bit. I think it's probably the most relevant use case to what we're going to talk about today is effectively the NHS's equivalent of an ERP.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to dive in with a pretty meaty question, and I think one that's top of mind for a lot of ERP specialists right now, a lot of execs at companies, particularly as they're beginning to think through buying their first ERP. And the question really is, do you need an ERP today? Everybody's talking about automation. Everybody's talking about agents this and automate that. And the kind of backbone of an ERP is to be the system of record. Mm-hmm. And while that might still be necessary, it also implies a lot of manual work and a lot of systems, human systems in place to make those systems function. So really it's like, do you need an ERP? But I think the more nuanced question there is like, when do you need an ERP? Has the scale changed of when you should start to consider implementing such a large scale system? Erin, I don't know if you want to start with some thoughts there.
Yeah, happy to. The question begs another question, which is, how good are your managers? How good is your operational procedure? How good is your ability to break down silos in your own org and communicate effectively across them and share information? Because I think that's where you get stuck. Do you need an ERP? Theoretically, no. But if you get into a place where you have a large enough organization that is having trouble with the source of record, having trouble with communication, having trouble with standard operating procedure being rolled out into multiple locations, multiple manufacturing facilities, all of those pieces, those complications, can you do them with Excel? Yeah, sure. Excel and email can get you pretty far, but it's not going to get you to meeting the needs of your finance team at the end of the day, because all of a sudden you've got Excel sheets running rampant and people not talking and people fat fingering things, and that transition of data and communication, that's really where an ERP plays, right? So there's maybe even another question on top of that, which is, what is an ERP? Because we talk about a lot of different functions that fall into what most ERP, like SAP's logos on there, right? SAP does all kinds of stuff. Not all of it is technically a traditional ERP system, but some of it comes with that SAP package that it would be considered an SAP ERP implementation, right? So to me, it really gets to a point of, you need to know your business as a COO, as a CFO, particularly. You need to know when you've hit a wall where that lack of communication, that lack of one entry point and one exit point for your company's data is holding you back from growth. Because that's what it will end up doing, is you'll just stagnate. So to get to that next stage, you really do need something to get you there. And that's where the software can help.
What do you think? So taking that answer as yes, you still need an ERP today. Do you think the line of where you need an ERP has changed, considering how much software is now available on the market to automate stages of a company's life cycle, particularly earlier in those stages where you might not need to spend as much in the ERP? Do you think that the scale of company that makes sense to deploy an ERP has grown?
Not really. And I think it comes down to a couple of key pieces around really what your business does and how well it's functioning outside of the technology at some point. I don't think that an ERP need is based on the size of the business. I think that there might actually be a case to be made for the opposite, which is smaller companies probably need to invest more in an ERP style system because things like reporting have gotten more complicated. The regulations on like even ESG reporting have gone through the roof. And how are you accurately providing that information for some of those reporting needs? That's company size agnostic. You still have to do it. right? So how are you meeting those needs? Smaller companies probably suffer more from that than even larger companies do. So it might be the opposite, but no, I don't think that there's a one size fits all answer to who needs an ERP. It's not, hey, you've hit X amount of revenue. Congratulations, you now qualify for an ERP. I think it's you need to find the systems that work for you, and an ERP might be the right answer depending on what it is that you need to do.
I think we've seen a swell in the market of mid-market solutions, and I think those range from automation platforms that aim to replace a lot of the work you would normally buy an ERP for, with the selling point of like, why add complexity with another software when you can just automate a bunch of these processes. But we've also seen a swell of kind of mid-market AI-enabled ERPs come in. We've had a whole bunch in the last just couple of years. You've got Dual Entry that just raised like $100 million Series A. You've got Rillet, now arguably a little more enterprise and a little more finance focused, but still Campfire, which came out of Y Combinator, that's doing very well. There's really been a large number. And then you've also got ERP overlays that are coming up, which are tools that are overlaid over an existing ERP to try and automate segments of the process that the ERP product itself is maybe not capable of automating yet. I think touching on that though, Will, we spend a lot of time helping companies integrate new software. And I'm curious, a large part of what Vasori's done over the last 12 months is realize how much learning we have to do and how many skills we have to build in our professional services team to cover the breadth of services we integrate. Like the first few NetSuite integrations we built were extremely painful because none of us knew how to integrate NetSuite. Now I'd consider ourselves semi-NetSuite experts just because of how many integrations we built into NetSuite. Leaning on that idea, I'm curious, for these new AI-enabled ERPs, like how much learning do you think they still have to go through to get to a point where they can actually service the market, considering just how much like professional services it takes to actually deploy an ERP?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one point that's really pivotal in that is obviously there's been such a boom in recent years of SaaS products that are best in class for a specific business function. And again, that's a market that's become really bloated and pretty saturated. If you're looking, as we are, to build integrations to support as much value as possible from an ERP, you have to have such a diverse and agnostic knowledge of different SaaS products across such different capabilities within a business for it to be truly effective. So to your point, George, there's only so much you can do with people and professional services. You have to have the tech and the power in the products that underpins that to be able to learn quickly and understand quickly and really interrogate what it's doing and be able to do it and translate that efficiently into something that's viable and tangible as an actual kind of integration out to these products. So to your point on NetSuite, absolutely the first few were painful. I think, like you say, probably a few of our engineers could get jobs with NetSuite now pretty easily based on what they know. I think more importantly than that, like our platform, how our MCP works, how our agents work, has such kind of an intrinsic context of NetSuite now that we know when the next one comes along, even if you give it a half-cut prompt, it has the context to be able to understand what you want and build from there. I think certainly like iPaaSes that are looking at this ERP space, I think it's quite a rude awakening for a lot of them as to how much kind of diversity they need to have in the types of systems they're going to be integrating based on the requirements of these ERP customers.
Yeah. So talking about startups, of course, Vasori is a startup, you're a Series A company, and when you're playing in an enterprise space, that always makes it interesting. But I would also say Triplevolt is close to being still in a startup stage.
Absolutely.
You're a new consulting firm. Of course, we're very close to yourself and Nate, and you guys have really come out of the blocks at a pretty incredible pace and taking on some much bigger consulting firms who have hundreds of thousands of people and effectively infinite resources at their disposal. As you think about building a consulting function around ERPs, how are you thinking about changing the way consultants have traditionally done things? I'm curious if there are like 2 or 3 examples you can pick at where historically we spent the first 3 months meeting with different teams and understanding their core workflows. And that's changed because we can now do that with a particular AI tool or a particular function of AI that enables us to do these things substantially faster. I'm curious if there are any particular examples you can pick out, Erin, that really stand out as you guys have built what is effectively a consulting startup at Triplebolt.
Absolutely. I think the number one, and our attendees may find this semi-self-serving, but I promise I didn't cue this up with George beforehand, is using Versori. So as we look at traditional ERP timelines and cost, they can be crippling. Doesn't matter which ERP that you're going to be implementing. The amount of power that you need on the human resources side, both from a consultant standpoint, which means prices go up, but also from the internal resources that you need to pull away from their day jobs in order to focus on this to get it ready and launched, can take companies down, genuinely. And so when we look at that, some of those benefits that Triplebolt is leveraging as we go to market with our customers is we are not afraid of using other startups who are doing amazing things like Versori to get to that point where we're faster, where we're in, we're out, we're saving you consulting cash, which, yes, are we taking a hit on that? We are, but it's okay because we're delivering better results. It's better for the internal teams. It guarantees your success. So for me, one of those big things is Versori, is the ability to make the implementation faster because integrations is now a fraction of the time that it used to take on a normal timeline. So that's a big use case. I think some of the other use cases are leaning on the people in a company. I think the general corporate culture is becoming more tech savvy. I think it's been painful, but I do think we're getting there. And so being able to walk in to a client and say, yes, we are going to use ChatGPT to help us write your test cases. Like UAT is now going to take a quarter of the time to prep because we're gonna let an AI go in and say, okay, based on this, here are your test scenarios, here are your user stories, go. Even being able to do that, I'd say the company that I was implementing SAP at last, just a couple of years ago, would have been horrified by someone saying that to them. But today, I can walk in and say it, and everyone's just great. Sounds good. Sounds like that's less money, more efficient. And all of our test cases are going to be based on what's really going on in the system and not what some BA sitting somewhere thinks is going on in the system. Like those pieces are definitely coming faster. And it's just based on the fact that people are less afraid than they used to be. And we're leaning into that. And we're not afraid. And we use AI every single day in what we do. And becoming experts in the technology allows us to speak intelligently to our customers about it. So they are not afraid because they know they're in it with a partner who understands and has their best interests at heart, including security. Can't talk about AI without talking about security. And we know where that line is too.
Yeah. To switch it over, Will, like having been at the NHS, like the NHS is a incredible organization. And I think a lot of people talk about it as one of the really important things the UK has done to provide a public service over the last kind of number of decades.
Yeah.
It's also an organization that everybody knows is old and clunky and takes a long time to do absolutely anything. From your experience going into an organization that's also quite often run by older individuals who aren't necessarily AI native, how do you think about presenting AI first solutions to companies at that scale with that kind of legacy who might be more risk averse? I know, like, for instance, like security is quite often something that comes later in the procurement process. It's something we've seen actively now comes further and further up the procurement process for the reason of people are conscious about AI accessing their data. So I'm just curious your perspective there.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic. I do think, to Erin's point on how she can openly say to companies now that we're going to be writing test cases with AI and they're comfortable with it. I think there's been a huge shift in the past kind of year to 18 months with people being more comfortable with using kind of agentic approaches and AI in kind of their core systems. So I think that fear of the unknown and what AI is actually doing is definitely diminished somewhat. But again, echoing Erin's sentiment entirely, like you have to cash in on the fact that you're able to do stuff so much quicker and at such a better affordability, and ultimately provide, whether it be the NHS or another huge enterprise kind of legacy company, you're able to provide an outcome for them at whatever it'll be, 10-20% of the cost and 10-20% of the time by leveraging these technologies. And I think giving them the comfort that it's not just like free reign, you're not just like, here you go AI, do what you want with it. And like our role is to make sure we're using it as an accelerant, but we're using it in a way that's safe and secure, and we're managing it and we're responsible for that. And we're responsible for getting those organizations comfortable that we know what we're doing with that, which is ultimately our day-to-day job. But I do think, yeah, if you went back 18 months, you'd run into some pretty significant brick walls with certain companies. I do feel now they're a lot more inclined to listen. And a lot of that comes from probably their C-suite shouting about AI every day and how it needs to be adopted more. And then you do get people who still have reservations about what that looks like in practice for their organization, but they're more willing to entertain the conversation because there's that broader strategic directive. And then hopefully when you get into that conversation with them, they realize the value and the benefit, and you move from there.
Yeah, so as you tease up a really interesting question that I hadn't really thought about, but how, Erin, you're face-to-face with a number of these like CIOs, enterprise technology leaders day to day. We've been talking about the last 24 months, like exploratory AI dollars. Companies putting a lot of budget down for, we don't really know where this is going. We don't really know how we're going to use it. We don't really know the legal frameworks. And there's a bit of a gray area, like period.
Yeah.
But here's a budget for like teams to go figure it out.
Yeah.
But you then counter that in the space, got like MIT published that paper 2 months ago that was like 75% of AI enabled like enterprise projects fail.
Yeah.
Now, if you read into that report, it's fairly like the media kind of picked up on one thing and kind of ran with it, but the reality is like not really the case. But then also, if you like, they were exploratory dollars, they're gonna fail. Like not all of them are gonna work. And it feels like now we're transitioning to a point where people actually know where they want to spend. I'm curious how you see the level of risk aversion changing and how you see people selecting where to invest AI research dollars. I'm curious if there are any particular business segments that you really see that picking up pace versus decreasing at the moment.
So it's interesting you bring up that article because I do remember seeing that headline, and the thing that hit me, and don't quote me on the exact percentage, but I think we're still sitting at 60 to 70% of traditional ERP implementations fail. So if you think about it that way, fail the first time. Apologies. Fail the first time. So if you think about, oh, AI is failing, its ERP has been failing a lot longer, people are still doing it. So I think that to me that metric, it's just what happens in companies that are working on anything groundbreaking, on anything that is fundamentally going to change what they do as a business, especially when it's a technology implementation. So knowing that, what I see being successful in AI adoption in a company is actual use cases, not the idea of, hey, I'm going to use Midjourney to make cat pictures. It's got to be something that's actually business focused. So how are you successfully using it? Like even a ChatGPT enterprise implementation, great. You've now given all of your employees ChatGPT. Are they asking it personal questions? Or are they asking it work-related questions? Have you taught them how to prompt it properly? Have you taught them how to use it in an effective way that's going to propel the business forward on a daily basis and make their lives easier? Or have you just said, hey, by the way, here's someone to talk to? Like that's a friend, that's not a tool. So I think that's been a big piece of it. When I see adoption, to me, are the companies that will focus, and it's industry agnostic. I really don't think it's industry specific, because you have CTOs in every industry that are making mistakes and CTOs in every industry who are doing this correctly. But it's where you start to look at technology as an enabler to a really solid process. This is true for ERPs too, when you're implementing those. You need to see it as a benefit add, not the thing that is directing your process. You can't implement software without the process being in place first. Otherwise, you're not actually implementing it to the need. You're just implementing it because it's a shiny object. And that is where failure comes from. True of ERPs as well.
Yeah, no, it's these experimental dollars. I think the other thing that's shifting here is like the economic outlook. Just as people begin to buckle the hatches in prep for a recession. I know we've been talking about it stateside for what feels like forever at this point, but there's only so long before something happens and that pressure continues to increase.
Yeah,
I think there really is now a shift to, okay, we've experimented for 2 years. How do we actually make this work? I think we'll share the resource afterwards, but there's actually a really interesting podcast with Bill McDermott. He's the CEO of ServiceNow, on how ServiceNow is approaching going from being a product company to an AI company, and how they're implementing cross-company workflows that, because they have so much visibility over so many aspects of a company's of a business, they're able to really build workflows that are truly valuable, like the moment you turn them on, versus here's a bunch of stuff that we built, somebody try and figure out how to like make this valuable. We can share it afterwards, but a great resource for anybody who's interested. Well, on your end, like we touched on the NHS spine, which is like effectively, and correct me if I'm wrong, effectively the NHS's version of an ERP, or at least a very substantial part of it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more on, one, what it is for people that are not familiar, because I think that's an important like framing. But two, how you think about, as leading that project, how you began to think about deploying AI tools, and how you went through the motions of identifying an inefficiency, deciding on a solution, de-risking that solution, and then convincing senior leadership to adopt it, considering it was using much more modern solutions. Paint some color there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, as you mentioned, George, spine was centrally it was basically an ERP for the NHS. So it was all kind of core patient information, whether that's related to specific records, whether it's around like demographics, whether it's about vaccination records, whether it's about prescriptions, all of that data centralized across everyone within the National Health Service and standardized, hence the kind of link to an ERP, in a way that was then consumable by multiple different kind of entities. So the big lift for spine initially was getting everything centralized and in a consistent format. Then the phase two was then, how do we, now we've got this data in a consistent format that's real time, how do we now federate this back out to the hospitals, the general practitioner surgeries, the pharmacists that need this information real time in a safe and secure and real time manner, which is my position when I was brought in to build the external kind of API platform that allowed effectively that gateway into spine. So it was very, as you can imagine, super kind of security conscious, based on if you've got a bad actor that manages to bypass that proxy and get into kind of spine code, it's going to be a big problem. So there's a huge amount of considerations there, but it's really interesting how you frame using more like innovative tech when you're in those conversations, because like it's a bit of a cat and mouse game, but if you can get the people to have concerns about specific things and put those concerns forward, and the best solution to those is in innovative products that have been recently built to deal with that threat specifically, it then becomes a no-brainer for them to use those products. And the kind of how novel they are can almost be dispelled because you're giving them a solution to a specific problem. So there was a lot of looking at that kind of threat modeling and what we were specifically worried about, and then looking who's the leader in supporting that, and whether it was someone who's been going for 40 years or whether it's someone who's been going for kind of 6 months. If they were best in class, it was an open conversation, which I was quite unexpected by, to be honest, but also very happy about. So yeah, I think that's how it was, almost like drip feeding innovation into the solution rather than going like full throttle. Oh, we should use all this really cool stuff, kind of to Erin's point, without actually having like the question that you're answering, just trying to give them an answer full tech. It's like making sure that the senior execs and the people are aware of what we're trying to solve, and almost like they bring it to the table and then you provide the solution for that exact point. And more often than not, it is more recent, innovative tech companies that have got the best answer.
Yeah.
So that's how we got a blended model of still keeping people happy by using some kind of long-standing names, because everyone gets a warm hug from using an SAP or whatever, and then linking in and threading through it more like innovative products that allowed it to be really usable and really beneficial for the end users and really secure from the NHS's perspective.
Yeah. The joke is always you can't be fired for buying NetSuite or SAP.
Well, that's it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we only have a few minutes left, and I want to give Erin an opportunity to explain a little bit more about what Triplebyte is actually like doing as a consulting group and where you guys are going from being different to others. I think to touch on our last question, ERP's implementations historically don't go well. Like they generally, what is the stat? It's like we had it up on the screen a minute ago. 64% of ERPs end up over budget. ERP implementations end up over budget. The over budget's commonly about 2 to 3x. And it's right. They can literally kill companies, and you can end up being fired over things like this. Yeah. I'm curious, Erin, like as someone who's been in the space, if ERP implementations take longer than we say, why don't people just say they're going to take longer? Like it sounds like a really basic question. If something takes 2 years, why not say it's going to take 2 years? Why is it historically caused such an issue to estimate these things?
Oh, that's a great question. I think there's a couple of reasons. The first might be blind optimism on the part of the implementation company. I think the blind optimism, however, is born from the idea that a company is inherently simple, and also that a company inherently knows who they are. And that's where you run into the biggest gap, is when you go in, and in a previous life prior to Triplebyte, I was a fixer. I was brought in when an implementation had gone wrong. And the first thing I would do is say, where are your process flows and where are your requirements documents? And I'd haul all of them out and I'd say, okay, great. Is this what you do today? Or is this what you want to do tomorrow? And most often it's, oh no, we map what we do today. It's not gonna work. The whole point of an ERP implementation, and why I try to even get away from the word implementation now to transformation, as kitschy as it sounds, is because you are meant to be going from where you are today to building a platform that will get you to where you want to be tomorrow. If you're building that platform for who you are today, you will fail. That hands down. And I think that's where a lot of those over budget, over timeline things come in, because they get to a point in the implementation where they realize that this doesn't meet a future need because they built it around the wrong requirements to start with. So one of the things that I've been really pushing for at Triplebyte on the consulting side is to make sure that not only are we asking, who are you today? It's who do you want to be tomorrow? Map that gap, map those deltas, and then also get away from the idea that an ERP is going to fix everything, because it's not. You do need to do the process work. That's number one. The second is get into an idea of what we're calling kind of the bill of materials. You can tell I came from the fashion world. The bill of materials for your technology solution. It's not going to all be a one size fits all. SAP is going to cure all of our evils. That doesn't work anymore. It's okay. SAP does these 4 things really well. We need these 4 things. Great. then it's, hey, CCH Tagetik does all your reporting and your ESG. Great, we need that because we have complex tax requirements because we're in X amount of countries, et cetera. Don't expect SAP to meet all of that. Get away from that mindset. Get away from the one size fits all. Get into the idea of you need a selection of software. Some of it might even be custom to get you to who you want to be and build towards that. And don't be afraid of an ecosystem. I've seen ecosystems that are 300 plus applications. We've all been there. I'm not advocating for that, just on the record, but I am advocating for you aren't just an SAP shop. And I'm picking on SAP. You could say the same thing for NetSuite. You could say the same thing for Infor, all of them. You need to start thinking about the holistic environment. And that's really the way you'll be successful.
Yeah,
just to add a little bit on that, George. So the integrations we build are relatively complex, but they're not like months and months or even like year-long projects. And scoping and requirement gathering is so painful even for that scope of work. So it makes like my eyes water to think about how tough that is for an ERP transformation, because I imagine the stats on the previous page are heavily down to that. Like, it's so hard to accurately scope and define exactly what you're doing up front, because a lot of it only becomes clear and obvious as you start the actual kind of transformation process. That must be tough. But it sounds like a lot of the processes you're putting in place are in with the kind of, what's your state today? Where are we going? How do we get there? Making sure it's really clearly documented, making sure you've got the right buy-in across all the business functions and all the right stakeholders. That is invaluable in terms of being able to try and provide an accurate timeline that you can then work to effectively.
Yeah, and it sounds super simple. It is shocking how few companies can go through that exercise without someone leading the way. It's almost impossible for them to do this internally. Sometimes it also takes the outside person being like, that's a bad idea, because the internal person won't say it.
Yeah.
So consultants are definitely not dead. I know Accenture did a whole thing about like how consulting was dead. And I was like, it's not dead. Not until companies can figure out how to be more truthful to their superiors.
So I know we're at time, and I don't want to keep anyone too long, particularly people that have taken the time to show up and listen to us today. Aaron, what's the best way to learn more about Triple Bolt? What's the best way for people to reach out to you, particularly if they're going through a ERP implementation right now? What's the best way to do that?
Well, I think my email address is going to get shared, so please feel free to just reach out to me directly. I think that's probably the fastest, most effective way. Our website is under construction, so I would say go to our website and learn more, but the new one isn't up yet. So I'm skirt that one, but yes, please just reach out to me directly. I'd love to chat. I'm always happy to kick the tires with anyone who's having issues, and we're all in it together. It doesn't always have to cost money to give good advice, and good contacts are always worth it. So please reach out.
Awesome. And then, if anybody wants to learn more about Vasori, you can find us at vasori.com. They'll also be shared in the email that we send around afterwards. If you're going through integrations or building integrations or going through an integration challenge currently, that's really our bread and butter. Is we enable you to build those integrations in days to weeks rather than months to quarters. And particularly at the enterprise level, we know it can be literal quarters, if not years, for some of these integrations. But thank you for the time, Aaron. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and look forward to chatting to everyone soon.